Coming up, we show you how to get the most out of a wide-angle lens. We go searching for one of the UK's most elusive animals. And we do some still life photography on a massive scale. Welcome to another episode of the world's best photography show, Photography Online. We are coming to the end of season 24 as we only have one more show to go before we start on season 25, which launches in January. But don't worry, our monthly podcast and PO live show will continue as usual, so there will still be new content to absorb for the remainder of the year. In fact, the team have just returned from a week on the road filming next year's photo challenge, something for you to look forward to. But let's get this show underway with our essential camera skills. This month, Harry shows us how to get the most out of a wide-angle lens and explains what to avoid if you don't want to make the classic big vista mistakes.
Wide-angle lenses can deliver some very dramatic results for a wide range of genres such as landscapes, portraits, architecture, and even wildlife. But used in the wrong hands, a wide-angle lens can cause your photos to become bland and, well, a little bit lifeless. So I thought it was about time to dispel a few myths about how to make the most of a wide-angle lens. Before we begin, let's look at exactly what a wide-angle lens is. To put it simply, it's a lens which gives a reduction to the image size compared to what we see with the naked eye. For example, if I use a full-frame camera with a lens set at 50mm, when I look through the viewfinder, the subject should stay about the same size as when I'm looking at it with my eyes. If we use a shorter focal length, let's say 35mm, when I look through the viewfinder now, the subject is going to appear smaller than it would do to the naked eye. This is not something that's easy to show you on video, though we're trying our best. But try it for yourself with your own camera and you'll see that things stay the same size when you use a standard focal length and get smaller with anything wider. A 50mm lens on a full-frame camera is considered a standard lens, as it neither magnifies or reduces a subject. 35mm would be considered a moderate wide angle. 24 to 28mm would be wide angle. 16 to 24mm would be super wide angle. Anything shorter than 16mm would be super duper wide angle. It's important to remember that you can't tell if a lens is wide angle just by its focal length. You see, it's as much to do with the sensor or the film size as it is to do with the actual focal length. A 450mm lens can be a wide angle lens if used on a big enough camera, whereas you can go into single digits if using a micro four thirds camera. However, to keep things simple, we're going to assume for the rest of this feature that we're using full frame figures. When most people start out with their first camera, it typically comes with a kit lens, which will cover everything from wide angle to short telephoto, such as a 24 to 70mm or 24 to 105mm. Once we get bitten by the bug, the first thing we tend to do is want to buy another lens. We now have a choice as to whether we opt for a longer lens or a shorter one. There is no right or wrong here, as it really depends on what kind of photos you find yourself taking. But the most common genre of photography by far is landscapes, and this pushes many to opt for a wider angle lens over a longer focal length. This is where the problems can start. As I've explained already, all a wide angle lens does is simply reduce the size of your subject in frame. As a consequence, you get more peripheral stuff around it. This is referred to as field of view. A standard lens has a field of view of around 40 degrees side to side when in the landscape orientation. A wide-angle lens will generally give around 60 degrees of view, and super wide angle would be anything greater than 75 degrees of view. Human vision has over 180 degrees of view, which far exceeds anything a super wide-angle lens can achieve. Probably the biggest mistake we see when it comes to using wide-angle lenses is trying to fit too much into the scene. As a consequence, the subject ends up too small in frame and its impact is therefore reduced. Another mistake we commonly see with wide-angle lens photography is including foreground interests, for example some rocks, just for the sake of it. But if they're not going to add particular intrinsic value to your photograph, they're probably not worth including. They're going to be big in frame and are going to end up competing with your subject in the background. Now, it looks like I'm about to get pretty wet, but there's still lots to cover about wide-angle lenses, so let's change location.
To get the best results from a wide-angle lens, we need to get closer to our subject so that the reduction in size, due to the short focal length, is being negated by magnification from us getting closer to it. You might now be thinking, what's the point of this, as the subject ends up the same as when using a standard lens from further away?
You'd have a valid point, but by moving our viewpoint, we change the perspective. Now, this is probably one of the most important tools in our kit bag when it comes to composition. It allows us to control the visual weight of our background to foreground subjects. So I've just taken a variety of photographs at different focal lengths. I started off really very close to the stones here at 12mm, then a few paces back to 16mm, a few more paces to 24, then to 35 and 50mm, quite a ways back from here. Now, what that should hopefully show is that I've tried to keep the stones roughly the same size in frame. The same can't be said for our background, and you'll see it drastically alters the perspective of our background. So by moving closer with a wider angle lens, I'm really placing the prominence on our foreground subject and minimizing any distractions in the backdrop. By moving further away and using a longer focal length, I'm placing equal importance on both the foreground and the background. There's no one best fits all solution. It entirely depends on the photograph you want to create. However, what it should show is that the most important factor is the position of your camera. One thing you don't want to do, however, is stand a very long way away and use a wide-angle lens.
Shooting distant subjects or scenes with a wide-angle lens rarely works, as the results tend to lack drama, depth, or dimension. Of course, there are always exceptions to the rule, but in general, this is a useful thing to remember.
Another factor to consider when using super wide-angle lenses is that as subjects get further from the center of frame, they will start to look elongated and distorted.
Look what happens to the wheel of this car as it moves from the center to the edge of frame. Some photographers use this distortion to their advantage by positioning mountains close to the top of a wide-angle frame to make them look more elongated and taller than they actually are. However, if you want to make mountains look tall, then use a much longer focal length, at least 3 or 4 times the magnification of a standard lens, as this will have a far better impact than trying to use the distortion of a super wide-angle lens.
The take-home message here then, if you want to get the most out of using a super wide-angle lens, then rather than having the mindset of trying to fit as much in as possible, think about getting closer to your subjects so that they fill and dominate the frame.
So hopefully there was some useful information in there for you. If you are one of our many POOs, that's a Photography Online official supporter, we'll be looking at all the lens options available for wide-angle photography on our next PO Live show, which is a little earlier than usual this month on the 8th of September. PO Live is exclusively for our supporters, so if you want to join in the fun, all you need to do is become one of the POOs, and not only can you take part in our next live show, but you can also watch all the previous ones, so you will have hours of content to binge on. Last month we we gave away a camera, so there are great prizes to be won. It's only £3.99 per month and you can cancel at any time. Another great reason to join the Poos is that you'll get 25% off our 2025 calendar, which is priced at £15. But that's not all. If you pre-order the calendar before the end of September, you stand a good chance of receiving our lucky logo, which will be placed at random into one of the first shipments of calendars. The receiver will get to join us on our all-inclusive winter photo holiday in the Highlands of Scotland, a prize worth a whopping £2,500. Anyone can pre-order the calendar, so you don't have to be one of our Poos to do that, but they are a great bunch. If you want to see the company you'll be in.
Hi, my name's Kevin. I live in the northeast of Scotland and I'm delighted to support the best photography channel on YouTube by being one of the Poos.
Hi, I'm Sue Barton.
And I'm Susan Cresswell.
And we're both from Ontario, and we're happy to be Poos.
Hi, I'm Jeff, coming to you from the beautiful Kitsap Peninsula in Washington State. As a subscriber from episode 1, I am proud to say I am a Poo.
I'm Caroline from Frederick, Maryland, here in España, and I'm proud to be a Poo supporter.
My name's Tim Hutchinson, and I'm a Poo.
Well, it seems as though Harry is on overtime this month as he is back to host our special feature. Must be setting up for Christmas.
There is an animal that hasn't been seen in Britain for over 400 years. With huge teeth, a scaly-looking tail, and the ability to fell swathes of trees. You'd be forgiven to think I was describing a ferocious dragon or mythical large predator stalking the countryside.
That, however, would be absurd. I am, of course, talking about the beaver, an animal surrounded by myth and misinformation. Around 13 years ago, I was lucky enough to work on a beaver education program, taking out groups of people to highlight amazing aspects of these massive rodents' lives. But despite all that amazing access, I rarely photographed them. Today then, I'm hoping to plug a hole, little beaver pun there for you, in my wildlife photography portfolio that I've desperately wanted to fill for around a decade now. Over the last 30 years or so, there have been a succession of legal and unauthorised, or I call them accidental, releases of beavers into the British countryside. But there are really only a handful of places where you can see them free-ranging and wild along river systems, as a lot of the others are in large, controlled and fenced education programs still. I'm at one such spot where you can see wild and free-roaming beavers, and so while there is no guarantee I'll see anything, I've enlisted the help of a local guide to increase my chances. Beavers are truly amazing animals, one of my favourites in the whole world, and I could go on about them all night. We could start off with some of their feeding behaviour, for example, and the fact that, of course, beavers are known for chopping down trees. Now, they're not just doing this to be destructive, although some people seem to think so, but it's a way of them accessing the leaves on tops of the trees, which for them is one of their major food sources. But they'll also eat not the bark of the tree, but actually a layer underneath the bark of the tree, the xylem and the phloem inside what's called the cambium layer, basically the stuff that's holding all the nutrients up and down the bark of the tree. Then we could move on to the way they manage to dam and flood local areas, drastically changing the environment around them, but at the same time increasing biodiversity, giving places for fish to spawn. We're going to have increased insect biodiversity, and then because of that, more birds, and it goes on and on and on. One of my favourite facts, the fact that beavers use their tails as dinner plates when they're feeding. I mean, who wouldn't want that? We could move on to talking about lecture on beaver ecology, and whilst I'd love to continue educating you all on the amazing behaviour of beavers, we have of course come here for photography. Beavers are primarily nocturnal and or crepuscular, meaning they're going to be active from the late evenings through the night into the early hours of the morning. So one of the best times to get photographic opportunities is as the sun gets close to setting and the beavers emerge from their lodges. Now the sun is starting to drop towards the horizon now, so I think it's time for me to become a bit less conspicuous and see if we have any luck. And so the beaver search began. Maybe a beaver over here? No, not a beaver. We spotted something. Is that a beaver? No. Pretty cool, but still not a beaver. Oh, that's definitely not a beaver. That's way too small. I think I jinxed it when I said there's no guarantee of seeing anything. Initially and naively, I only set aside one evening to get my photographs of a beaver. But you never know with wildlife whether it's going to be a good day or a no-show day. In the end, I returned to this location on 7 different occasions, walking mile after mile and catching just brief glimpses. Even with the best local knowledge, to get something I was truly happy with meant putting in the effort, with patience, persistence and luck all playing a part. Eventually though, as is so often the case, it all came together. It's just swam in front of me. It's a little bit dark in here, but it's swimming upstream, so we're gonna have to see if we can get round in front of it. First beaver in like 12 years. Ecstatic. So we've been running up and down the river all evening and finally found something. Swam just up in front of us, it's gone into the reeds. Just waiting for it to pop out. We've got the light right now, so it needs to appear like in the next few minutes and it'll be absolutely perfect.
Was it worth all the effort and return visits? It's all part of wildlife photography, and I loved every moment. I got a few images I'm pleased with, but I might have found my new subject to obsess over. I could have returned every day for weeks to improve on what I got. And who knows, maybe I will. After all, who wouldn't want a good beaver shot in their portfolio?
It's great to see beavers making a comeback in the British countryside. As Harry said, he will be back there over the coming months to try and capture more photos of them felling trees and building dams. All right, well, it is time to tell you about this month's Photography Online podcast, which has just gone live. If you haven't listened to it before, I host a lively conversation between two of the team. This month, I was joined by James and Nick, who, among other things, discussed why Adobe are fast becoming the most disliked photography brand, what makes a photo your own work, and we look into the viral image of the Kamala Harris crowd and give our thoughts on whether it's genuine or not. The podcast is available on all the usual podcast platforms, but if you struggle to find it, there's also a link down below in our video description, or you could simply Google Photography Online Podcast and I can guarantee it will appear. It's a great show to listen to when you're driving the car, sitting on a train or plane, or just relaxing at home. Give it a listen. It is free and it's available to everyone, even if you're a Sony user. Just kidding. We welcome everyone. All right, well, with the nights drawing in fast, it's a good time to think about what we can do indoors when we want to scratch that photography itch. One idea is to set up a still life shot. Marcus did this recently, but with a rather unique difference.
Today, I've got a small photo project to do, so I thought I would invite you along to join me. Now, this is my kitchen, and that's why it sounds a little bit echoey, so apologies for the sound. But I've just redecorated in here, and I've ended up with two rather blank walls where I really want to put some artwork. I don't really want to put a landscape photo on a kitchen wall, so I thought, what better than to have a nice still life of some food. So I've gone out and I've bought a variety of vegetables, different tones, different textures, and I'm going to position them in this fruit bowl here, which I bought specifically for this photo. So what I'm going to do, which is interesting about this shot, is I'm going to keep this life size throughout the entire process of the shot. So I'm going to end up with, say, a photo where this is exactly the same size as it is in reality. So basically it's a macro shot on a massive scale. So when we end up with this is going to be that size. Obviously, once you've got a frame around it, it will fit quite nicely into that space there, and we'll have some vegetables sticking out the top and maybe some around the front as well. We'll see what happens with that in a moment. But you'll see that the camera that I'm going to shoot this on is coincidentally the same size as the fruit bowl, which is why I bought that specifically to fit this camera's dimensions. So let's get set up and we'll get on with it.
I absolutely love using this camera for so many reasons. I love the control it gives over composition and depth of field. I enjoy setting it up and the challenge that it often provides, meaning that I actually have to think about what I'm doing and work out how to solve problems. Now, before we go any further, I want to make it very clear that I am by no means a competent still life photographer. On the few occasions I have tried something similar in the past, the results have ended up being very underwhelming, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't try. Besides, this is a great way to spend a rainy day indoors doing some photography, which is why it's so important to enjoy using the equipment you have. If you don't end up with a good enough photo, at least you've had fun trying. After all, that's what it's all about. Arranging the vegetables is key here, so I invested a lot of time on this, rather than just throw them in the bowl and hope for the best. I'm trying to separate the tones and textures so as to balance the composition, but at the same time being careful not to end up with something too contrived. It wants to look natural and comfortable.
So I've got everything roughly in the right place. There's going to be a lot of fine tuning and tweaking this, but I won't know until I start composing and looking through the back of the camera. But at the moment, I'm reasonably happy with the distribution of tones and textures. So next thing to do is to get the camera sorted out in terms of distance, because there's no zoom here. I'm using a 355mm lens, which sounds like quite a long focal length, but on this camera it's actually quite a wide angle lens. It's equivalent of around 28mm on a full frame camera. But I can't zoom, so in order to get the subject the right size and fit the full frame, I'm going to have to move this backwards and forwards. So that's going to give me my magnification, and then I need to get the height right. Once I've got my distance, I need to get the height right to give me the right viewpoint down on the subject. I don't want to look too low, otherwise I'm going to be looking through it, and I don't want to be looking down on it too much, otherwise I'm going to get too much table. So getting the right angle is going to be key here. So it's going to require a little bit of jiggery-pokery, but we'll get there.
Focusing this camera is simply a case of winding out the bellows so that the lens moves further from the film plane. However, as you do this, the magnification changes on the ground glass, so it's a case of finding the perfect balance of distance to subject and bellows extension.
So I'm getting there. I've got the camera at the required distance so that the subject is filling the frame. So it goes from side to side, and it goes from top to bottom, although it creeps out a frame at the bottom, but I don't mind that. So I've got it focused, and as you can see, I've put a label on one of the tomatoes just to get critical focus on that point. But because I'm at 355mm and I'm, well, probably 1.5 meters from the subject, my depth of field is about 1 millimeter. It's so fine. So in order to get the back of the subject reasonably sharp and the front of the subject reasonably sharp, I'm going to have to tilt the lens forward so that rather than the plane of focus going at this angle and cutting through the subject, it's going at this angle and it's kind of lying across the subject. And that's going to give me a much more kind of perceived depth of field. It's not going to be any deeper than it is at the moment, but because I'm able to lay it over the subject, it will look as though it's a deeper depth of field. Once I've done that, I'm going to still have to shoot at something like f64 or maybe even f90 to get the depth of field that I need for this. So we're just going to tilt the lens forward, and this is a little bit of trial and error because I need to guesstimate where it is, go around, look at it, decide whether it's too much or too little, and then come back and adjust it, and it's just a trial and error process. But this camera is so big that you can't sit behind and look and reach around and adjust the lens, so it's a case of lots of running around, but it's better than gym membership. So I know that I've got critical focus on that front tomato, so I'm going to now put this on the aubergine, or eggplant if you're watching from the US. And I'm going to try and tilt the lens forward and get this reasonably sharp now, and then I will check the tomato. And once I've got these two things sharp, then the asparagus and everything at the bottom of the frame should automatically come into focus as well.
You can achieve a similar result by tilting the film plane, but that also alters the perspective. So here, I'm tilting the lens only.
So after a lot of jiggery-pokery, I think I'm there. I'm happy with the composition through the camera. What's strange is that to the eye, it doesn't look very balanced. It looks a complete mess. And I kind of want it to be messy and chaotic, but it looks a lot more organized and balanced through the camera than it does to the eye. So just have to go with what I'm seeing through there. However, it is upside down and back to front, so it's a little bit more difficult than what you might think. So I've got the plane of focus kind of coming from the front of the bowl going up at an angle. I'm happy with that. I'm probably going to shoot at f64. That's going to give me a reasonable depth of field, but I'm still going to have everything at the front here out of focus, but I don't mind that because they're very strong textures. So we've got sweet corn here and we've got asparagus, and even though they're going to be soft, you're still going to be able to see very strongly what they are. So I think that's my setting. So the next thing to think about is the lighting. Now, there's quite a lot of ambient light going on in here because we've got some skylight windows up here, we've got other windows there. However, it's getting towards the end of the day, so the ambient light level's dropping. So I have no control over my artificial lights. So if I can't get them powerful enough, then all I have to do is wait a little bit for the ambient light to drop and then increase the exposure. It's the same as turning the ambient lights up. So we'll see how we get on, but this is going to take a bit more experimentation, getting the right angles and the right balance of light. So we'll play with some lights.
The lights I'm using here are super cheap and nothing fancy. I'm controlling their power by adjusting the distance to the subject. I don't want them too close, as the fall off in light levels will be too obvious across the scene. But I don't want them too far away, as the light source becomes too small, making the shadows too harsh. Understanding the inverse square law is really helpful when it comes to positioning lights. Watch here how the light levels fall as I move the light further from the subject.
Okay, so I'm happy with the lighting as it is. Good news is I don't need to wait for the ambient to drop because I think this is okay. Now, got to bear in mind, although this is a very colourful scene, I'm shooting it in black and white. So I've obviously arranged things with that in mind to get the different tones and textures. You can't get colour film for this camera, it's just a fact. So it's just a black and white camera basically. I've measured the exposure as a flat exposure and I'm getting f64 at 8 seconds. However, that's going to be very different to the exposure that we actually do. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, you can see that I've got the lens racked out a long way from the film. And when that happens, you need to take in something called bellows extension. So this is a 355mm lens. So if I measure how far this is from the actual film, we can then work out what our bellows extension is. So that's 70. So basically, I've doubled the focal length. So the focal length is 355mm. I'm at 700mm, or 70 centimeters from the film plane. So I'm double the distance that the lens would be if it was focused at infinity. So if you double the distance, I need to increase my exposure by 4 times. Well, I need to double it and double it again. So 8 seconds becomes 16 seconds, call it 15, and then double it again becomes 30 seconds. So we're at 30 seconds at f64 now. However, there's one more calculation that we need to do, and that is reciprocity failure, because at 30 seconds, FP4 is not going to give us the desired exposure. So when I find my phone, which I don't know where that is, we'll be able to work out what the reciprocity is.
Reciprocity failure is something which occurs with most films once the exposure is longer than 1 second, but you can look up the adjustment needed. Here, my reciprocity app is saying that 30 seconds becomes 1 minute and 12 seconds.
So one more thing, just before we take the actual shot, you notice that I've got a lens hood on here, and that's to try and shield the light shining on the front of the lens, because these large format lenses, they're pretty old and the coatings aren't what they would be on a normal lens, so they're a lot more prone to flare. So I'm trying to shield as much of the periphery light as I can off the front of this lens, just to give a little bit more contrast on this scene. But we're focused, we've got the composition done, we've got our exposure sorted, so we're kind of running out of excuses not to take this shot now. So I think it's time to spend £25 and press the button.
Taking a photo on this camera is more than just that. It's an event. After all, I've usually invested a lot of time setting everything up and rehearsing the act. Now it's time for the performance, which in this case will last just over a minute. So enjoy the show. So here is the negative. As you can see, everything is pretty much life-size, which was my intention. A quick check of the sharpness, and I've actually ended up with way more depth of field than I had expected, possibly too much. When viewed at a distance, it appears as though everything is sharp. It's only on closer inspection which reveals this is not actually the case. I'm not entirely happy with the chairs in the top two corners, something which wasn't obvious when looking at the image on the ground glass. I also think I need to give the whole scene more space on the left and right, as well as the bottom, possibly with a slightly lower camera angle. But let's look at a major positive. This photo gives me the opportunity to show off the ultimate in resolution. As we know, all lenses are sharpest at their centers and get softer towards the edges. So let's go to the edge and take a close-up look at the detail we have here. We're going to zoom in to this area here. How's that? As is often the case, I think this image can be considered a work in progress, as there is lots which could be improved. The good news is that I know what this is and can easily rectify it. The problem, however, is that I've since eaten all the food. Oh well, off to the shops it is, I guess.
You may have noticed that there was no sponsorship in the show and no commercials, so if you got something useful from it, do consider supporting us so we can continue to make more future content for you. The easiest way to help keep the lights on around here is to become one of our poos or to purchase our 2025 calendar, for which all the profits go back into making the show. We really appreciate everyone who helps out, and of course you benefit too by having better content to watch in the future. We're already working on our season 25 shows, so by supporting us now, you'll be rewarded well into next year. We only have one more full show for this year, but we're not sure when it's going to be released, as all the team are away on trips in the coming weeks. We'll just surprise you with it when it's ready, so keep a lookout. The best way to do this is to make sure you're subscribed and got your notifications turned on. Marcus and Harry are about to set off to host our Photography Online Adventures trip to the Italian Dolomites, so if you're lucky enough to be on that, have a great time. We're also busy hosting visiting camera groups from overseas who come to capture the best that Scotland has to offer during the autumn months, so it's one of our busiest times of the year. Bear with us, normal service will resume, I promise. The podcast and our PO live show will continue as usual, so there's still plenty of content to look forward to. Until then, you know what to do. Take good care, but most of all, take good photos.